What if the family who raised you was built on a lie, and the truth was buried with your mother? Madeline Whitmore was cast out, erased, and forgotten. But when a letter from the past resurfaces, everything she thought she knew about blood, loyalty, and legacy shatters. In a world of forged wills, hidden affairs, and courtroom betrayals, she returns, not for revenge, but for the truth. This is the story of a daughter reclaiming her name, unearthing a family's secret that could ruin everything, and choosing to walk away with more than justice. She walked away with peace. It started with a line, 8 words, no greeting, no warmth, just finality. We've decided to keep the ceremony very small. The email arrived on a Tuesday evening, nestled between an e-receipt from Whole Foods and a quarterly report from work. It should have been easy to ignore, but I knew that subject line, guest list finalist, would be the thing I remembered more than the wedding itself. There was no phone call, no explanation, just a link. We'll send the private live stream closer to the date. Hope you understand. I stared at the screen for so long the laptop went dim. I didn't move. My wine glass sat full beside me, untouched. The hum of the refrigerator sounded louder than usual, like it, too, was waiting for my reaction. Elaine, my sister, my blood, was getting married. I wasn't invited to stand beside her or sit in the front row or even be acknowledged. I was being asked to watch from a screen, like a distant coworker, like an afterthought, like a ghost. And yet, the irony, I had paid for it. All of it, the orchids, the calligraphy, menus, the handmade paper for the invitations. My credit card bore the bruises. My name appeared on every invoice. I was the financial scaffolding for a wedding I wasn't welcome at. I leaned back slowly in my chair. The kitchen was dim, except for the soft amber pendant light above the island. My breakfast plate from that morning, half a piece of toast, one lonely smear of jam, still sat where I'd left it. The toast was blackened. Forgotten when I was on the phone with our mother. That call had ended like so many others, with my voice drowned out. She doesn't want to lose the quartet, I'd said, trying to be helpful. You're not the bride, my mother had snapped. Let her decide. Elaine had chimed in, chirpy but barbed. You've done enough, Z. Just stay in your lane, okay? My lane, apparently, came with a $sign. The message had echoed in my head as I'd clicked confirm on the final wire transfer that morning. $50,000, 0 cents. A number that could have been a down payment. Or the start of my own future. But I had transferred it without protest, because that's who I had always been. The steady one, the reliable sister. The one who didn't make things complicated, until now. That evening, the family group chat buzzed with photos from the engagement brunch. Smiling faces, champagne flutes, sunshine filtering through French doors. Out of 17 photos, I appeared in 2. One was blurry. I was in the background, pouring wine. The other was worse. I'd been cropped out entirely, a shoulder with no name. The caption read, "So grateful for everyone who made this moment so special." I stared at the screen for a full minute. Then came a ping. Sabine, thanks again for the photographer and final invoice payment, Foya. They turned out beautiful. I didn't reply. What was there to say? Thank you for erasing me with such finesse? Instead, I closed the group chat, shut my laptop slowly, and walked toward the back patio. The air was warm but restless, a gentle wind lifting the edge of my cardigan. I sat in the wicker chair Dad had refinished 5 years ago. The cushion creaked beneath me. Somewhere in the distance, wind chimes clinked. I whispered, not to anyone in particular. I paid for the celebration. Why do I feel like I should apologize for showing up? No one answered. Only the wind did, brushing past like it had somewhere better to be. I sat outside until the porch light flickered on, casting a warm glow across the wooden slats beneath my feet. I didn't feel sad. Not exactly. What settled in me wasn't sadness. It was something quieter, heavier. A recognition, maybe. that something had been true for a long time, and I had only now begun to name it. Inside, the kitchen lights buzzed faintly. I re-entered the house with deliberate calm, slid the patio door shut, and walked past the glowing screen of my muted laptop. It still displayed the last thing I'd read. Hope you understand. Upstairs, I turned on the lamp in the corner of my office. It was a small room, one wall lined with books, another with framed certifications that once made my mother beam at PTA meetings. I sat down at my desk and pulled up the folder labeled Whitman Wedding. Inside were rows of PDFs, contracts, receipts, itemized spreadsheets. Every decision, every expense, every moment that someone else would now take credit for. The florist, the decorator, the cake designer, all with my initials at the bottom, all addressed to M. Whitman. I clicked through each one slowly, methodically, as though rereading a will. Then my phone lit up. A call from Mom. I let it ring twice, then answered. "Hey," I said, flat. No emotion. She launched right in. "I was just checking in. I heard Elaine's been tense." "Tense," I repeated. She exhaled like I'd just handed her a problem. "Fazia, listen, your sister's under a lot of pressure. You know how weddings are, so many moving parts." She made her part very clear, I said. "You've always been the steady one, the practical one. I admire that. But maybe now is the time to let Elaine shine. You've had your career, your independence. Elaine only has this." There it was, the script. "So I should disappear?" "I'm saying don't make this about you. Please don't ruin this for her." Click. The call ended before I could reply. But I didn't throw the phone. I didn't even flinch. Because this time, it didn't sting. Not the way it used to. I stared at the screen a long moment before reopening the spreadsheet. This wasn't about recognition anymore. It hadn't been for years. But it wasn't going to be about erasure either. Just as I was closing the file, a new email appeared in my inbox. Subject, guest list, finalized. From Elaine. No greeting, just a line. "After talking with Nathan and his family, we've decided to keep the ceremony very small. We think it would be best if you attend virtually. We'll send a private link." Then at the bottom, italicized like a joke, "Don't take this the wrong way, la." I stared at the email, not blinking, not breathing. There was no misunderstanding, no grace to be given, no line to read between. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was a choice. I hit reply. Typed, "Sure. Enjoy your day." 4 words, no punctuation, no emotion. I hit send. The room was quiet. Too quiet. I poured the wine down the sink, washed the glass, dried it. Every movement slow, controlled. Something inside me shifted, not shattered, just moved into place. I walked upstairs, got into bed, and turned off the lamp. But I didn't sleep, because while they were planning photo ops and floral walls, I was planning something else. Not revenge, not drama, just a correction of history, of value, of who I was without their permission. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, not with purpose, just the kind of sharp awareness your body gives you when it's done pretending to rest. I sat up slowly, pressing my palms into the edge of the mattress, steadying myself against the weight that hadn't lifted overnight. Downstairs, the house was still, the kind of still that made you question if anyone had ever spoken in it at all. I didn't turn on music, didn't ask Alexa to play anything calming. Silence felt more honest. By 7:15, I was dressed, hair pinned up, a neutral cardigan thrown over a white blouse. I looked like someone on their way to a board meeting, not someone about to make one of the most personal, deliberate choices of her life. At the bank, Carlos greeted me with a smile too polite to be real. "Good to see you again, Ms. Whitman." "It's Ellis now," I said without thinking. Then I caught myself. Not yet. I followed him into the office. It smelled like toner and filtered air. On his desk sat a silver paperweight shaped like a compass. I had never noticed it before. "I need to cancel a transfer," I said, sliding a black folder across the glass. Inside were contracts, signed receipts, vendor agreements, all under my name, all tied to one event. He opened the folder, scanned quickly, then looked up. "The wedding?" I nodded. "There'll be penalties, of course." "I understand." He hesitated. "Would you like us to notify the recipients?" "No." I met his eyes. "They'll figure it out." Carlos paused, then sat back. "You don't owe me an explanation, but you look different today." "I feel different," he nodded. Not prying further, we finalized the paperwork in under 10 minutes. It was clinical. No fanfare, no dramatics, just ink on paper, initials by lines, and a quiet recognition that something had ended. Walking out, I didn't feel victorious. There was no music swelling in my ears, no internal applause, just clarity. Like when you wipe down a foggy mirror and finally see what's been there all along. I drove aimlessly for a while. The streets of Austin passed in a blur. Old bookstores, corner cafes, joggers with golden retrievers. People living lives untouched by family politics or passive-aggressive emails. Eventually, I parked in front of a small cafe, tucked near Barton Springs. The patio was half-shaded, the air sticky with the kind of spring humidity that clung to your skin. Noreen was already there. She hadn't ordered yet, just sat with the menu unopened and a glass of ice water sweating beside her. When I walked up, she glanced at me once, then said, "You did it." I didn't answer. She tapped her nails lightly on the table. "I wasn't going to say anything before, but I can't pretend anymore." I looked at her. "I helped Elaine finalize the table layout last week. She was stressed. I get it. But at one point she laughed and said, 'As long as my sister keeps paying, we're golden.'" The words hung in the air like steam. Noreen's voice lowered. "That's what she said, exactly." I didn't flinch. Just folded my napkin slowly like I needed something to keep my hands from reacting. "She's not wrong," I said finally. "Not yet." Noreen leaned forward. "You're not a wallet, Madeline." "I know." But what I didn't say out loud, what sat quietly behind my eyes, was that I had been, for years. And the only person who could end that was me. When I returned home that evening, the light was beginning to shift, that soft, golden hush that made even the ugliest corners of my street look cinematic. I paused in the driveway, longer than necessary, watching the sun stretch its fingers across the roofline. Inside, the house greeted me with its usual stillness. Not silent like absence, but the kind of quiet that felt earned. I kicked off my shoes by the door, walked into the kitchen, and opened my laptop without hesitation. The folder was already open. Whitman Wedding. My cursor hovered over the last document on the list. Final vendor disbursement, $41,000 cents scheduled transfer, Friday, 7:00 a.m. I stared at the prompt on screen. "Are you sure you want to cancel this transaction? This action cannot be undone." "Yes." I clicked, the screen flickered, the confirmation appeared, and with it an invisible weight lifted. Not the kind that makes you lighter, but the kind that lets you stand taller. I didn't celebrate. Didn't dance. I closed the browser, stood up, and walked to the window. The neighborhood looked the same. But something in me had shifted, not dramatically, not loudly, but permanently. Later that night, I was curled on the couch, wearing an old college sweatshirt, scrolling aimlessly out of habit. Instagram was open, though I hadn't meant to open it. My thumb landed on a new story from Elaine. "Special thanks to my future mother-in-law for the most heartfelt gift," it read. I tapped. The video showed Elaine holding a delicate pendant, the vintage redesign I'd commissioned months ago, the one she used to call dated. The one I'd rewritten a note for your something old and something that should always be yours. She didn't tag me. Didn't mention me, just smiled into the camera, teary-eyed, and said she knew exactly what I wanted. What a woman. I set the phone down on the armrest. No anger came, just a strange stillness. The kind that builds quietly, like a tide refusing to recede. I stood and walked into my home office, turned on the lamp. The light buzzed faintly, warm against the walls. I opened the drawer where I kept all printed copies of the contracts, vendor by vendor, payment by payment, signature by signature, all mine. Every flower arch, every embroidered napkin, every gilded envelope. I opened a new folder on my desktop, titled it plainly, "If They Push Me." Then, one by one, I copied every file into it. No flourish, no ceremony, just precision. I wasn't reacting. I was recording, preparing, documenting a truth they thought they could edit because the worst part wasn't being left out. It wasn't even being used, it was being erased. I shut the laptop. The room dimmed again. And in that darkness, there was no grief, only clarity. They had written a story without me. I had just begun writing one without them. The Zoom link came from Ela, not Elaine. The message was short, no emoji, no fluff. Everyone's already on, just hear them out. I stared at the screen for a moment, then clicked. 8 squares loaded one by one. My mother in her dining room, Elaine from the bridal suite, Uncle Ray propped up somewhere generic with a blurred background, and Nathan sipping from a ceramic mug like this was a Sunday brunch call. No one said hi, no one asked how I was. Mom launched straight in. "Madeline, sweetheart, we're all a little concerned. This last-minute decision, it doesn't feel like you." Uncle Ray leaned forward with the look of someone about to deliver a performance. "You've always been the responsible one. That's what made this so shocking. I mean, pulling out like that, it's not about you. It's about family." Nathan cleared his throat and began to speak, but Elaine raised her hand as if that were grace. She was calm, impeccably groomed, probably sitting in a hotel chair with a makeup artist, waiting off-screen. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed, as she said, "Let's just be honest, Mads. You've always been jealous." The words didn't fall. They struck. A quiet room snapped with heat. Elaine kept going. "Every time something went right for me, you made it about you, and this proves it. You couldn't handle it this time. It wasn't about you." The screen flickered slightly as Uncle Ray nodded, mumbling something about me acting like a martyr. My mother pursed her lips, likely thinking she was maintaining neutrality while allowing everyone else to fire. I sat there, hands folded, camera still, letting the silence grow just long enough to fracture their rhythm. Then I unmuted. "I didn't cancel your wedding," I said, voice steady. "I canceled my funding." The silence was immediate. Not shocked. Exposed. "You canceled me?" I continued. "When you sent that email telling me to stay home, when you cropped me out of the photos, when you posted a thank you and pretended the pendant I had made came from someone else." Elaine rolled her eyes. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I tilted my head. "Am I?" Mom leaned in, like proximity to the camera equaled sincerity. "We thought you were okay with being in the background. You've always been the strong one." I was quiet. Not okay. Nathan, for the first time, looked directly into the camera, his voice low, almost reluctant. "You could have just told us how you felt. We would have found a way to make space." I let out a breath, the kind that doesn't cleanse, just clears smoke. "I did tell you," I said softly. "Over years of unpaid recognition, over every gift without a thank you, over every seat near the restroom, I told you with my silence. You just liked it that way." Elaine looked away. Mom adjusted her pearl necklace. Uncle Ray sipped his drink. I hovered over the leave meeting button. "No more polite little sentences. I said. "No more editing myself to make you feel comfortable." Then I clicked. The screen went dark. And for the first time in a long time, I felt light. Not because a weight had been lifted, because I finally stopped carrying theirs. The phone started ringing before I even stood up from the desk. First my mother, then Elaine, then Illa, then Elaine again. I let each call buzz itself out, watching the screen glow and fade in quiet rhythm. Then came the texts. "You're being dramatic. We can fix this if you just stop. What the hell is wrong with you? Do not ruin this, Madeline. For once, just be normal." I turned the phone face down and walked to the kitchen. My tea had gone cold, but I held the mug anyway. My hands needed something to do while my mind slowly settled. Outside, the sky had shifted into that deepening dusk, peach melting into gray, a bruise fading across the skyline. "They don't know me," I said aloud. My voice startled even me. They didn't know the version of me that had stopped apologizing. The one who no longer translated manipulation as love or silence as peace. They knew the version that said no worries instead of that hurt. The one who covered bills, filled silence, and stayed late to clean up other people's messes, emotionally and otherwise. That version was gone. The silence I'd given them before had been a form of permission. This one was a boundary. I folded the dish towel and placed it neatly beside the sink. The simplicity of the motion steadied me more than any apology ever had. That was when the phone rang again. This time, the number was unfamiliar. A local area code, but not one I recognized. I picked it up. "Madeline?" It was Elaine. Her voice was thinner now, not icy, strained. I could hear movement in the background, clinking glasses, rushed voices, someone giving instructions. "I need you to listen." I didn't say anything. I messed up. I know I did. I was overwhelmed. Mom was spinning out. Nathan's parents were pushing me, but I never meant for it to get like this. Still, I stayed quiet. "We can fix it," she continued, rushing now. "I'll change the seat. I'll make a speech. I'll thank you. Just come, please." What she really meant was, "Please put out this fire before it burns through the curtain I've carefully sewn over the years." "It's not about the seat," I said. My voice didn't shake. "It's about how you made sure I wasn't in the picture unless I was holding a pen or a checkbook." A pause. I heard her breath catch. "Please don't ruin this for me," she whispered. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the script never changed. I just wasn't reading from it anymore. "I'm not ruining anything," I said. "I just stopped funding the illusion." Then I ended the call. The living room was dim now, the kind of twilight that blurred edges and softened sharp corners. I sat down on the couch and wrapped a blanket over my legs. There was no triumphant music swelling in the background, no cinematic cut to a plane ticket or a packed suitcase, just stillness, and the deep, resonant silence of a woman who had finally said enough and meant it. The letter arrived 3 days later, no return address, just my name, typed, not handwritten, on a stark white envelope sealed in neat precision. I opened it slowly, each rip deliberate, as if my hands already understood this would not be a gift, but a reckoning. Inside was a formal notice from Burke and Hammond LLP, a probate law firm in Charleston. My mother, Eleanor Whitmore, had passed away 2 weeks earlier, and I, Madeline Rose Whitmore, was being summoned for the reading of her will. I didn't cry, not because she didn't matter, but because she did. Too much for too long in all the wrong ways. The notice mentioned that both Elaine and Illa were listed as beneficiaries. It did not mention me, only said my presence was strongly recommended, which meant one of two things. Either I was included in something they didn't want me to know about, or I was about to be made a scapegoat, a target, or worse, a footnote. The reading was set to take place at the Whitmore estate, the same house I had left at 17. the same house I had never returned to, not even once. I booked the flight within the hour. The airport terminal in Charleston hit me with a wave of memory so physical I had to grip the rail near baggage claim. The scent of jasmine in the air. The way the humidity kissed your skin like something that wanted to stay. And then, her voice in my head. You can't just run off and expect the world to wait. That had been the last thing she said to me before I walked out, and now, apparently, I was the one being summoned. The Uber driver didn't speak much, just nodded when I gave him the address and tapped on the steering wheel to the rhythm of old country songs. As we pulled up to the estate, the gate slowly creaked open on its own, as if the house had been watching, waiting. Nothing had changed. The white columns stood rigid like soldiers. The manicured lawn was too perfect, too polished, too fake. I stepped out onto the gravel and stared up at the windows. Behind one of them, I could feel it, the quiet murmur of a home that had always preferred lies whispered behind silk curtains over truth spoken plainly. Inside, everything smelled of lemon oil and cold money, the kind of wealth that had calcified into silence over generations. Elaine was already there, sitting in the parlor in a black dress too tailored to be morning attire. Ela leaned against the banister, arms crossed, face unreadable. Neither of them looked surprised to see me. "Glad you could make it," Elaine said, voice flat. "We weren't sure you'd come." "I'm not here for you," I replied. "I'm here for the truth." She blinked once. No warmth, no welcome, just calculation. Mr. Hammond, the lawyer, emerged from the study, thin, gray, and entirely unimpressed by sentiment. "We'll begin shortly," he said. "Please make yourselves comfortable." I chose not to sit because nothing about this house, this family, this moment had ever felt comfortable, and now the reckoning was finally unfolding. One page, one lie, one name. At a time. The study door creaked shut behind us, muting the hallway as Mr. Hammond took his place behind a wide walnut desk. A leather binder lay before him, crisp and heavy. He adjusted his glasses and began. "This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Jane Whitmore," he said in a voice as dry as parchment. "Dated June 17th, 2020. Elaine sat with her legs crossed, one manicured hand resting atop a clutch purse that likely cost more than my first car. Isla leaned against the windowsill, gazing out as if all this bored her. Me? I stood, hands folded, pulse pounding. "To my beloved daughter Elaine Whitmore," Mr. Hammond continued, "I leave the sum of $100,000 and the antique jewelry passed down from the Whitmore line." Elaine smiled faintly, smug and predictable. "To Isla Whitmore," he went on, "I leave the beach property in Isla Palms along with its furnishings and all contents therein." Isla didn't react, though her eyes narrowed slightly. Then came the pause. Mr. Hammond cleared his throat, and "To Madeline Rose Whitmore, I leave my personal journals, years 1989 through 2020, currently held in a safety deposit box at Palmetto National Bank. Additionally, I request that Madeline be granted full executor rights over all charitable foundations registered in the Whitmore name." The room went silent. Elaine's face hardened. "Excuse me?" she snapped. "That has to be a mistake." "There is no mistake," Mr. Hammond replied, already flipping to the notarized section. "It's written clearly. She left Madeline with full oversight of the Whitmore Women's Fund, the Eleanor Scholarship Trust, and the Children's Health Legacy Foundation." "But I run those foundations," Elaine protested. "I've been the public face for over a decade." Mr. Hammond didn't even blink. "Legally, you never had ownership, just managerial oversight. Effective immediately, that authority transfers to Ms. Madeline Whitmore." I didn't move. I couldn't. Because this wasn't a gift. It was a message. The journals, the foundations, the legacy. She'd buried them in paper, ink, and tangled power, and then handed me the detonator. "What is this?" Ela finally said. Why give her the foundations? Why not the estate? The money? Mr. Hammond looked at me, then them. There's a letter enclosed in the journals, addressed to Madeline. No one else has. Seen it. Elaine stood abruptly. This is insane. She abandoned the family. She doesn't deserve anything. She didn't abandon the family, Mr. Hammond said calmly, eyes still on his papers. According to Eleanor's own words, the family abandoned her. It was like a match being struck in the dark. Elaine stormed out, heels clacking like gunshots on hard wood. Ela stared at me with something unreadable. Curiosity? Maybe. Or fear. I picked up the envelope Mr. Hammond slid across the table. My name was written in my mother's slanted script. For the first time in over a decade, I felt her voice brushing against mine. Not in cruelty, not in silence, but in the shape of an untold truth. I didn't open the letter yet. I left the study, letter in hand, past the silent hallway, past the oil portraits of people who'd never known me, and out into the garden. The air was thick with magnolia and memory. I sat on the stone bench beneath the old oak tree and looked at the seal one more time. Then I opened it, and her words, long buried, came alive. To my daughter, Madeline. This is the truth I couldn't say aloud. The rest would change everything. The letter trembled slightly in my hand as I read the first line again, not because I didn't understand it, but because I did too well. To my daughter Madeline, this is the truth I couldn't say aloud. Your birth was never meant to be erased, but I was forced to choose silence to survive. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. Looped and narrow, like she'd written it in secret, every stroke hesitant yet deliberate. The next lines peeled back the decades like layers of wallpaper, revealing a wall I never knew was there. When you were born, your father, Richard, refused to accept you. You weren't what he expected. You had my mother's features. Dark hair, soft eyes. He said you didn't look like a Whitmore. But that wasn't the truth. I stopped breathing. The truth is, you are the only child I had with Richard. Elaine and Ela were already born by the time I met him. They were his, not mine. Their mother died young. I raised them as my own, but I was never their blood. I sat frozen on the bench, the journal beside me now forgotten. My fingers gripped the letter as if it might fly away. All this time, my mother had been a stepmother to them, and I was the only one truly hers. They hated you because they saw you as a threat to their standing, and Richard, he saw your existence as a liability. When I tried to include you in the will early on, he threatened to pull funding from my projects, so I made another plan. A second paper was tucked behind the letter, an affidavit, a notarized statement dated 3 years before her death. She'd declared me the sole biological heir to her estate and to the Whitmore name. Everything else, Elaine's charity persona, Isla's beach house, the facade of our family, was smoke. A performance. By the time you read this, I will be gone. But I hope you'll understand why I stayed quiet for so long. This family is built on lies and legacies. But you, Madeline, you are the truth I never stopped protecting. I don't remember how long I sat there. The sun shifted, shadows moving across the grass like slow hands on a clock. Eventually, I returned to my room. I scanned the journals, flipping through years of silence, each entry a breadcrumb trail of regret and resistance. In 2007, a line stood out. Elaine hired someone to erase Madeline's academic record from Stanford's internal system. I paid a quiet tech to restore it. Madeline never knew. In 2011, Richard diverted funds meant for Madeline's trust. I created a second account. She never touched it. The foundation she left me wasn't just money. It was evidence. Insurance. A ledger of sins wrapped in leather binding. I spent that night making copies. Flash drives. Scans. I hid backups in 3 separate banks, because this time I wouldn't be erased. The next morning, I called Mr. Hammond. Calm, composed. I asked him to arrange a full review of the Whitmore Women's Fund. I gave him the journal entries tied to embezzlement. He didn't ask questions. He only said, "Understood." By noon, Elaine's assistant at the foundation had received a polite but firm notice. A review was underway, and that was only the beginning. Elaine must have felt the first tremor the same day the audit launched. I could almost picture her, the tightening jaw, the half-smile that didn't reach her eyes as she picked up the phone to call our family's lawyer, only to be told the audit wasn't external, it came from within, from Eleanor's own records, from her own daughter. She didn't call me. Not that day, not the day after, but someone else did. I was in the kitchen of the guest house, sipping lukewarm tea, when Isla's name flashed on my phone. I let it ring to voicemail. Seconds later, a text arrived. "We need to talk. You're ruining everything. Don't be like her." I stared at the message. Like her. My mother. The woman who'd raised both of them, who'd protected them despite being betrayed in return. I didn't answer. Instead, I booked an appointment to visit the Whitmore family vault the next morning. Under my mother's name, still listed in the legacy access files, it was buried deep in the archives of Whitmore and Langston LLP, a private law firm that had served our family for generations. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with fireproof boxes, deeds, journals, and statements filed over 6 decades. Everything cataloged, everything hidden, in plain sight. Mr. Lambert, the elderly archivist, looked at me through thick lenses when I arrived. "You look like her," he said. "Eleanor never came down here without gloves. Said the truth leaves fingerprints." He led me to a leather box marked WH1E, my initials. Inside, sealed in plastic, was a birth certificate, not a copy, an original. The name Madeline Eleanor Whitmore, printed clearly, dated February 6, 1987. Under Mother, Eleanor Grace Whitmore. Under Father, left blank. I ran a finger along the edge. My father had refused to sign. Even then, behind it was a photograph. Faded, folded. A hospital room. My mother in a pale blue gown, cradling a newborn. Her eyes were tired, but proud. In the corner of the frame, someone had written in ink, "She's mine no matter what he says." I sat back on the wooden bench, surrounded by the weight of lineage. So much of my life had been defined by what I didn't know. Now every truth was pressing in from all sides. There was one last item in the box. A small voice recorder. Its tape labeled Thanksgiving 2003, dining room. I pressed play. The hiss of static gave way to raised voices. I said, "She doesn't belong at this table." It was Richard, sharp, cold. "She's your daughter." Eleanor, choked but firm. "No. She's your mistake. You'll cut her out, or I'll cut you off." A chair scraped violently, then silence. Then my mother's voice, softer this time. "One day Madeline will know, and when she does, she won't just walk away. She'll take everything you built on lies and make it hers." I paused the tape. The echo of that promise hung heavy in the air. It wasn't just a declaration. It was a warning, a prophecy, and now it was in motion. When I emerged from the archives, the sun had already dipped low. I walked the streets of Charleston with a new steadiness in my step. People passed by, unaware that a war was unfolding in marble offices and silent vaults. That night, I sent the recording, along with copies of the birth certificate, Eleanor's affidavit, and financial documents, to 2 people. Mr. Hammond, and a journalist I trusted at the New York Ledger. I didn't send it as a threat. I sent it as a timer. Because soon the world would know exactly who I was, and who they were pretending not to be. The Whitmore estate was unusually quiet that morning. No gardeners trimming the hedges, no scent of fresh lilies arranged in the foyer, just silence, dense and watchful. I parked my car outside the front gates, stepped out in a black pantsuit, and walked the long gravel path up to the door I hadn't touched in a decade. When I rang the bell, I half expected no one to answer. But it opened too quickly. Elaine! Still in pearls, still wearing beige like it was armor. Her smile flickered when she saw me. Madeline! Mother! I said the word like a foreign object in my mouth. Behind her, the living room buzzed with restrained panic. Ela sat frozen on the edge of the leather couch, her nails chewed to the quick. Richard stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, jaw locked. And sitting nearest to my father's chair was Mr. Hammond. "My attorney, shall we begin?" I asked, stepping inside without permission. Mr. Hammond handed out folders, one by one. Birth records, audio transcripts, property deeds, financial audits. Each page a nail in the coffin of the version of this family they had paraded in society columns. Richard didn't sit. He paced. "You think this stunt changes anything? You're still illegitimate. Nothing in this folder makes you a Whitmore." I looked directly at him. "It's not the name that makes the legacy. It's the truth. And yours is rotting." Elaine's voice cracked. "What do you want, Madeline?" "I want the trust Eleanor left to be honored. I want the estate returned to her rightful heir. Me? I want her donations to be restored to the scholarship fund you drained. I want every lie corrected in public record, and I want your silence. You will not retaliate, not through the press, not through your lawyers, not through whispers." "And if we refuse?" Isla's voice was small. I slid a flash drive onto the table. "Then this gets leaked. Every recording, every document, every bank transfer under Eleanor's name that ended up in yours." Silence. Then Richard's laugh. "You're bluffing. You don't have the stomach to burn down your family." I stepped closer. "I'm not burning down my family. I'm reclaiming what's mine from people who pretended I didn't exist." Elaine finally sat, her hands trembling. "If Eleanor could see you now?" I cut her off. "She does. Every step of this was hers. The trust documents were signed the day before she died. She left the trail. I just followed it." A long pause. Then Mr. Hammond cleared his throat. "You'll receive written confirmation by end of week. All assets transferred. Public statements issued." Richard looked like he might protest, but Ela touched his arm. "Just once. That was enough." It was done. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the mirror above the fireplace. Same chin as Eleanor, same eyes, same fire. She'd been erased, buried beneath polished floors and pearl necklaces. But now, Eleanor Whitmore's daughter had come home. And she wasn't leaving quietly. The house stood behind me, shrinking with each step I took toward the gates. Its grandeur couldn't hold a candle to the truth it had buried for decades. I didn't look back. Not when the door shut, not when Elaine's sobs finally cracked through the stillness. Not even when Richard called my name. Soft, unsure, and for the first time, real. I didn't need it anymore. The reporters were already waiting outside, their vans parked along the curb like vultures dressed in navy blue. They hadn't been tipped off by me. Someone else had done it, maybe Ela, maybe a housekeeper with a conscience, but it didn't matter. I paused just once as microphones angled toward me. "My name is Madeline Whitmore," I said, "and today I've reclaimed what was stolen, not just from me, but from a woman whose name this family tried to erase. Eleanor Whitmore was my mother. This house, this legacy, her voice, none of it ever truly disappeared. It was silenced, but not anymore. I didn't take questions. By the time I reached by car, my hands were steady. For the first time in years, Weeks passed, then a month, then another. The headlines did their cycle: scandal, heiress, betrayal, inheritance wars. But as fast as they came, they faded. I kept the promise I made at Eleanor's grave. The Whitmore Foundation was rebuilt, under her name, not mine. Scholarships for first-generation students, grants for women in medicine, a restoration project for the community clinic she used to volunteer at on weekends. Isla sent a letter, handwritten, not to apologize, but to acknowledge. She said she didn't understand what it meant to grow up invisible until she saw me stand before the family and refuse to be erased. She said she was trying to be better. I didn't write back. Not yet. Elaine sent flowers, white orchids, with a card that said nothing. Richard? Silence. But Mr. Hammond informed me that Richard had stepped down from the board. That, perhaps, was the only real apology he could offer. As for me, I moved into a modest brownstone in Boston, closer to the hospital where Eleanor once trained. I didn't need the estate or the cars or the ballroom with its echo of lies. I kept only one thing from that house: a locket. Eleanor's. Inside was a picture of her, young and bright-eyed, and beside her, me, a baby, cradled in arms that the world said had let go, but now I knew she had never let go. She had left me pieces. Threads to follow, letters to decode, memories tucked into the folds of other people's lies. I wore the locket every day, not as a trophy, but as proof. Proof that sometimes the dead don't just speak. They fight. Through us. And that the most powerful revenge isn't just taking back what was stolen. It's becoming everything they tried to bury. Madeline Whitmore didn't rise from ashes. She burned down the silence and built a name no one would ever erase again. Thank you for walking this journey with me. From the silence of a locked room to the echo of truth that shook the very foundation of a legacy. If you've made it this far, then you already know. This story was never just about revenge. It was about reclamation, about rising from what was buried and daring to say, I was always here. To everyone who's ever felt invisible within their own family, whose voice was drowned by louder lies, whose truth was doubted even by those closest to them, you are not alone. Madeline's story is fiction, but her pain, her search for justice, and her quiet determination are real for too many. This was for the daughters erased from family photos, for the mothers who left trails of truth behind them, and for every person who chose not to stay silent, even when it hurt. I want to thank the storytellers, researchers, and emotional truth-bearers who helped shape this tale into something bigger than one woman's reckoning. Every twist, every confrontation, every buried letter was crafted with care to reflect a reality many endure in silence. If this story reached into your chest and made you feel seen, hurt, healed, or haunted, then we did our job. Special thanks go to the women who inspired this story. Those who never got their apology, those who never saw justice served, and those who chose to move forward anyway. Your strength is the blueprint. Your courage is the spine of stories like these. To the viewers and readers who showed up with open hearts and minds, thank you. You allowed Madeline Whitmore to speak. You witnessed the pain and stayed for the transformation. In a world that moves too fast, where attention is fleeting and empathy is rare, your presence here is a quiet revolution, and for that, I am grateful beyond words. To the forgotten, may your truth one day be known. To the silenced, may your voice return, louder than ever. And to those still trapped inside legacies of manipulation, guilt, or control, there is life after escape. There is light, there is peace. This isn't just a thank you, it's a reminder that no matter how tangled your roots may seem, you are not bound to the soil that hurt you. You get to replant. You get to redefine your name, just like Madeline did. So when the credits roll, when the screen fades to black, and you return to your life, carry this story with you, not as a tale of vengeance, but as a map toward freedom. Because the most powerful revenge is peace, and the most radical legacy is healing. Thank you for listening, for feeling, for remembering her name. Madeline Whitmore. She was never missing. She was just waiting to be seen. The storyteller.